When a wealthy, racist boss humiliated his pregnant black employee, he thought he had the upper hand. But what he didn't know was that she had been recording every vile word. As the truth comes to light, the consequences are more severe than he ever imagined. You won't believe what happens next. Subscribe now to see how justice is served. The skyscrapers of Titan Core Solutions towered high above the busy streets of Manhattan, glinting like a fortress of power and prestige in the early morning sun. At the 22nd floor, Amara Adeyemi stood at the elevator doors, clutching her growing belly as the digital numbers blinked higher. Her breathing was steady, but her mind raced. She adjusted her navy blazer over her dress and smoothed her braids down as if the small acts of tidying could keep the world from noticing the tightness in her chest. Today felt different. Titan Core Solutions, known as the Titan of Finance, was one of the largest investment firms in the United States, a playground of the elite, where towering egos and deep pockets dictated the rules. To most people, the building was a symbol of opportunity. To Amara, it was also the battleground of her dreams and dignity. Amara Adeyemi was no stranger to challenges. Born in Lagos, Nigeria, she had grown up in a bustling but humble neighborhood, surrounded by the chaotic rhythms of a city bursting with ambition. Her father was a civil servant, and her mother, a schoolteacher. Together, they stretched every naira to provide for Amara and her younger siblings. Even as a child, Amara had always stood out. Not for privilege, but for her hunger to learn. At 13, she won her first scholarship, a small grant from a local nonprofit. At 15, she earned the highest grades in her school, capturing the attention of programs that offered opportunities for gifted students. Each time, Amara packed her determination and wore her pride like armor, proving over and over that she belonged at the table, no matter how exclusive it seemed. It wasn't until she secured the Ivy Reach International Scholarship that her world truly cracked open. She was 16 when she boarded her first flight to the United States, eyes wide, hands gripping her passport, and heart pounding with dreams. She landed in New York City and saw a world that glittered with possibilities, but also bristled with unseen walls. Amara earned her place at one of the most prestigious universities in the country. She had to juggle everything: heavy coursework, part-time jobs in campus cafeterias, late-night tutoring sessions, and loneliness that gnawed at her when the lights dimmed in her tiny dorm room. Unlike her classmates who complained about long summers in Europe, Amara spent breaks doing research internships or working odd jobs to survive. Her professors admired her. Some classmates sneered at her. "She's lucky she got in," they'd whisper. But luck had nothing to do with it. It was Amara's brilliance and relentless grit that brought her this far. By the time she graduated with honors in finance and economics, Amara had amassed a reputation as a rising star. Yet for all her accolades, she knew the world would see her first as a black woman, one with an accent and a past that wasn't gilded with wealth. She couldn't afford to falter. When Amara received the offer from Titan Core Solutions, it felt like a dream realized. A major firm in Manhattan that handled billion-dollar portfolios, Titan Core was the kind of place that set careers on fire. She'd beaten out hundreds of applicants for her position as an associate analyst, and she'd worked hard to keep proving her worth. But Amara quickly learned that Titan Core was not designed for people like her. Her first year at Titan Core had been a blur of 16-hour days, presentations delivered to stone-faced managers, and too many moments where she had to hold her tongue. Richard Whitmore, the senior VP of finance, and her direct boss, had made sure of that. At first, Amara had chalked it up to pressure. Everyone knew Richard was demanding, sharp-tongued, and ruthless with those he thought didn't fit. But as the weeks turned into months, it became hard to ignore the pattern. "Amara, do you have the quarterly projections report?" Richard's voice rang out sharply across the conference room. Amara stood at the far end of the table, clutching a file she'd spent the past 2 nights preparing. The other analysts sat in silence, typing notes or pretending to be busy. "Yes, sir, I have it right here," Amara said, her voice calm. She walked over to hand him the file, but Richard didn't bother to look at it. Instead, he smirked. "You know, Amara, I don't understand why it takes you so long to get these reports done. It's simple math." The words stung more because of the way he said them. loud enough for everyone to hear, dismissive enough to make her feel small. Amara swallowed the lump forming in her throat. "The numbers are double-checked for accuracy, sir," she replied evenly, holding her ground. "Accuracy?" Richard scoffed. "Sure, I'll take a look, but maybe next time, you can try not to overcomplicate something this basic." A few chuckles rippled through the room, quiet, uneasy laughs from colleagues who wouldn't dare meet Amara's eyes. Amara sat down, pressing her hands against her knees to steady herself. She could feel the heat of humiliation spreading across her skin, but she kept her face blank. This wasn't the first time Richard had treated her this way. He had a knack for making pointed comments during meetings or casually excluding her from conversations that mattered. Amara knew what was happening. His racism was subtle, but it was real. And yet, there was no concrete proof. Keep your head down. Work harder. That had been Amara's silent mantra for months. She couldn't afford to lose this job. The paychecks weren't just for her, they were for her family back home. Her younger brother was starting university in Nigeria, and her parents depended on her to help with tuition. And now, with a baby on the way, the stakes had never been higher. Amara had been 3 months pregnant when she told HR. They'd congratulated her with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Since then, she'd noticed her assignments piling up. Richard often made offhanded comments about her needing extra time to rest. "Don't worry, Amara," he'd say, smirking. "We'll try not to overwork you. I know it must be hard to focus these days." She knew what he was implying. Richard thought she was weak, that her pregnancy made her incapable, but he was wrong. The day Amara decided to start recording Richard, she hadn't planned it. It happened after yet another humiliation, this time in front of a client. Richard had criticized her pitch, claiming it lacked sophistication. He hadn't given her time to respond. Instead, he'd cut her off, thanked her for the attempt, and proceeded to explain her ideas as if they were his own. Amara had sat through it all, silent and burning inside. When she returned to her desk, she couldn't shake the feeling that things would only get worse. Her hands hovered over her phone. She opened her voice memo app and stared at it for a moment. What would happen if I had proof? Without overthinking, she pressed record. From that moment on, Amara began documenting her interactions with Richard. Meetings, calls, offhand remarks. She told no one. It wasn't just about proving what he was doing. It was about reclaiming her power in a place that wanted to strip it away. As Amara left the building that evening, the setting sun bathed the skyscrapers in gold and orange. The streets buzzed with the hum of the city. Taxis honking, strangers brushing past one another, the sounds of a place that never stopped moving. She paused on the sidewalk, one hand resting protectively on her belly. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "You've come too far to turn back," she whispered to herself. Amara Adeyemi had faced mountains before. Richard Whitmore was just another one to climb. What neither of them knew yet was that the fall was coming. For now, Amara walked into the evening shadows, holding on to her recordings like a secret weapon, silent, steady, and waiting. The office of Titan Core Solutions hummed with its usual robotic efficiency the next morning. Phones rang in crisp tones, the click-clack of polished shoes echoed across the marble floors, and the air buzzed with an unspoken rule: keep up or get left behind. Amara arrived early, as she always did. The coffee she carried in her hand did little to calm her, but her expression remained composed. She had learned to wear composure like armor. She couldn't afford to crack, not here. On her desk sat a massive stack of files she'd been assigned late the night before, reports that didn't belong to her department. It was Richard's latest tactic. Assigning her tasks outside her role meant piling on stress while simultaneously sabotaging her actual responsibilities. If her performance faltered, he'd have an excuse to push her out. Amara lowered herself into her chair, her hand resting instinctively on her belly for reassurance. "You've been through worse," she thought, reaching for the top file. At 10 a.m., Richard strode into the floor's open workspace, his usual arrogant energy radiating like a bad cologne. His voice boomed across the room. "Team, gather in the conference room in 5. I want updates on the Smithson account." Amara stiffened. The Smithson account had been her project for weeks. She had spent hours refining projections, calculating risks, and prepping for today's meeting. But as the team gathered in the glass-walled conference room, Richard made his move. "Let's start with Daniel," Richard said, pointing at one of Amara's colleagues. "Give us the highlights." Daniel blinked in surprise, glanced at Amara, then cleared his throat awkwardly. I'm not sure You're not prepared?" Richard cut him off, scowling theatrically. "Fine. Amara, why don't you summarize the account for us?" Amara bit the inside of her cheek. Her pulse raced, but she forced herself to remain steady. This was what he wanted, to make her stumble. "Of course," she said, her voice clear and even. She began presenting, her words smooth and authoritative, projecting confidence that she wasn't sure she felt. But Richard wasn't listening. He leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk on his lips, and interrupted halfway through. "Amara, are you reading from the slides?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "The client won't appreciate being spoon-fed basic numbers." Her cheeks burned. Around the room, a few coworkers shifted uncomfortably. "No, sir. I'm providing key insights." "Enough," Richard cut her off, waving a dismissive hand. "We'll discuss this later. Moving on." The meeting continued, but Amara felt like a stone had settled in her chest. Richard didn't need to yell or insult her outright. His tactics were surgical, designed to cut her down and leave her credibility bleeding out in front of everyone. Back at her desk, Amara stared blankly at her computer screen. Her phone sat in her bag, recording. The voice memo app had become her quiet ally, capturing every barb and humiliation Richard threw her way. She thought of her family in Nigeria, the sacrifices her parents had made. Her mother's tearful prayers when she'd first left for America echoed in her mind. "You are our hope, Amara. Go and build the future you deserve." But was this the future she deserved? Working twice as hard to be treated half as well? Enduring silent snickers from colleagues who stayed silent when Richard attacked her? Amara blinked back tears, refusing to let them fall. "Hey, you okay?" She turned to see Elena, a colleague from HR, hovering nearby. Elena was one of the few people in the office who had been kind to Amara. "I'm fine," Amara said quickly, offering a tight smile. Elena frowned. "You don't look fine. He's being harder on you than usual." Amara hesitated. She wanted to confide in someone, but she didn't trust HR to stand up against Richard. Not yet. "It's nothing I can't handle," she said softly. Elena sighed, looking as if she wanted to press further, but she let it go. "Just let me know if you need anything, okay?" The tension reached a breaking point later that afternoon. Amara was summoned to Richard's office for what he called a performance review. She knew better. This was another excuse to tear her apart behind closed doors. His office was a sprawling corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Manhattan skyline. Richard sat behind his massive desk, staring at his computer. He didn't bother to look up as she entered. "Close the door," he said curtly. Amara obeyed, her heart thudding in her chest. She clasped her hands in front of her to keep them from shaking. "Sit." She sat. Richard leaned back in his leather chair, finally fixing his gaze on her. His expression was calm, too calm. "Amara, I'm starting to wonder if this job is too much for you," he said, each word slow and deliberate. Amara stiffened. "I'm handling my responsibilities, sir." "Are you?" Richard raised an eyebrow. "Your performance in meetings has been lackluster. You're struggling to keep up with your peers, and quite frankly..." He paused, his gaze dropping pointedly to her belly. "It's obvious where your priorities are these days." Amara froze. The silence was deafening. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Richard said. "Pregnancy is a distraction, Amara, and it's showing. I need someone fully committed to this team, not someone counting down the days to maternity leave." His words hit like a physical blow. Amara's voice trembled with barely contained rage. "My pregnancy has not affected my work. I've met every deadline, exceeded expectations." "Don't get defensive," Richard interrupted, waving her off like she was an unruly child. "I'm trying to help you. You should consider stepping back until you can focus properly. Maybe this job isn't a good fit for you after all." Amara gripped the arm of her chair, her nails digging into the leather. Her phone, tucked in her pocket, recorded every word. "I'm committed to this job," she said, her voice low but firm. "I won't step back because you think I'm a distraction," Richard smirked. "Suit yourself, Amara. Just remember, this industry doesn't reward weakness." Amara left Richard's office with her fists clenched and her pulse roaring in her ears. She could barely see as she made her way to the restroom, locking herself inside a stall. Her entire body shook as she replayed his words. "You should consider stepping back. Pregnancy is a distraction." For the first time, tears fell. Quiet, angry tears. She was furious. At Richard, at the company, at herself for feeling powerless. But as the tears subsided, something shifted. Amara straightened up, wiped her face, and looked at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were red, but they were determined. "I'm not weak. I'm not stepping back, and I will not let him win." She took a deep breath, hand resting on her belly. "It's not just me anymore," she whispered. "I'll fight for both of us." Amara had been recording Richard to protect herself. Now it felt like a mission. This wasn't just about her. It was about every person like her, the ones who had been silenced, humiliated, or pushed aside because someone else decided they didn't belong. The fall is coming, she thought. Amara didn't know how yet, but Richard Whitmore would learn the hard way that he had underestimated the wrong woman. Over the next few days, Amara moved with a new focus. Her phone became a lifeline, constantly capturing Richard's behavior, which had taken on a sharper edge. Perhaps sensing her defiance, he doubled down on the subtle attacks, carefully worded criticisms, and veiled insults that he thought would leave no trace. But Amara was ready. Every word, every gesture, every humiliation was now recorded. "Amara, I thought I made myself clear." Richard's voice carried across the floor, loud enough for everyone to hear. Amara froze in the middle of her explanation to a coworker, holding the Smithson account files in her hands. "You seem to have difficulty prioritizing," Richard continued, sauntering toward her desk with a smug expression. "Why are you still on these numbers? I needed that data hours ago." Amara held her composure, though her knuckles whitened where she gripped the documents. She spoke calmly, careful not to show him the satisfaction of rattling her. "The data is complete, sir. I just needed to confirm accuracy before handing it in. I'll have it on your desk in 5 minutes." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Accuracy? I'd expect that from someone at your level. But I guess expectations have to be adjusted, don't they?" The jab hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. Amara's colleagues kept their heads down, pretending not to notice. Her pulse pounded in her ears, but she refused to look away. 5 minutes, sir," she repeated, matching his stare with steady resolve. Richard scoffed and walked away, but Amara noticed how his confidence faltered for just a second. It was small, but it was there. That evening, Amara sat alone at her desk long after most of the office had emptied. The city lights blinked through the floor-to-ceiling windows as she reviewed her recordings, cataloging the incidents and notes in a hidden folder on her laptop. She knew she had enough to expose him, but it still wasn't enough to win. A voice startled her. "Burning the midnight oil again?" Amara looked up to find Elena, the kind HR officer, standing in the doorway. Her face was soft with concern. "Just wrapping up," Amara said quietly. Elena walked in and perched on the edge of a desk nearby. "You're not okay, Amara. I've seen the way he talks to you. It's not right." Amara paused, unsure of whether to trust her. HR was rarely on the employee's side, especially when it came to powerful executives like Richard. "What do you mean?" Amara asked cautiously. Elena sighed. "I know what he's doing. I've had people come to me before, but no one ever has enough proof to push back." She leaned closer. "Do you?" Amara's eyes flickered with surprise, but she nodded slowly. "I'm working on it." Elena's expression turned serious. "If you have something, don't sit on it for too long. Men like Richard are untouchable until they're not, but you have to be strategic. Don't let him see it coming." Amara's heartbeat quickened. For the first time, it felt like someone in this office might believe her. "Why are you telling me this?" Amara asked softly. "Because I've seen too many people like you, brilliant, hardworking, pushed out, because they wouldn't play along. Elena straightened up. "If you need help, come to me. I'll do what I can." As Elena left, Amara felt something like hope flicker in her chest. She wasn't alone, not entirely. Later that night, Amara sat at her small kitchen table, her laptop open and her phone beside her, replaying Richard's words from earlier that day. The faint sounds of Manhattan traffic filtered through the window, a reminder that the city never truly slept. Her hand absent-mindedly rested on her growing belly as she listened to the recordings. Each clip was like a knife reopening a wound. The tone of his voice, the cruel undertones, the smirks, the sheer arrogance of a man who believed he could get away with it all. She thought of her parents, her siblings, her unborn child. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away. She couldn't afford to break down. Not now. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was her mother in Nigeria. "Amara," her mother's warm voice crackled through the line, filled with joy and longing. "How are you, my dear? How is my grandbaby?" Amara smiled weakly, wiping her eyes before answering. "We're okay, Mama. Just a little tired from work." Her mother's voice softened. "You work too hard, Amara. Remember, God sees your struggles. No one can take away what He has written for you." Her mother's words hung in the air like a balm to her wounds. Amara closed her eyes, letting the reassurance wash over her. "Thank you, Mama. I'll be fine," Amara whispered. She ended the call, her resolve stronger than ever. The next day, Amara began her quiet preparations. She had enough recordings to expose Richard, but Elena's words echoed in her mind. Be strategic. Don't let him see it coming. Amara spent her lunch break researching employment laws and workers' rights. She learned about workplace harassment and retaliation cases, noting the legal protections she could lean on. She also quietly reached out to an attorney specializing in employment discrimination. After a brief call, the lawyer assured her that her recordings could be powerful evidence, but only if handled carefully. "Timing is everything," the lawyer said. "You need to document a pattern. The more undeniable it is, the harder it will be for them to brush you aside." Amara hung up, determined to finish what she had started. Richard seemed to sense something had shifted. Over the following week, his behavior became bolder. The passive jabs turned into outright hostility. During a team meeting, he called Amara's ideas basic and unimaginative, cutting her off before she could defend herself. He sent scathing emails, blaming her for delays that weren't her fault. He even began to isolate her, excluding her from meetings with key clients. Amara endured it all, her recordings growing by the day. But one moment nearly broke her. Late one evening, Richard cornered her in the hallway as she was leaving. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he sneered, his face inches from hers. "People like you don't last here, Amara. You're replaceable. Always remember that." Amara's breath caught in her throat, but she refused to let him see her fear. "I'm not going anywhere," she said quietly, meeting his gaze. Richard laughed coldly. "We'll see about that." As he walked away, Amara's phone recorded everything, tucked neatly into her coat pocket. She exhaled slowly, shaking from the encounter, but a thought steadied her. The higher they climb, the harder they fall. That night, Amara sat at her kitchen table once again, her recordings spread before her like weapons ready to strike. She had Richard's words, his humiliations, his threats, all neatly cataloged and waiting for their moment. Her phone buzzed with a message from Elena. "Are you ready?" Amara's fingers hovered over the screen before she typed back, "Yes, it's time." The storm was coming, and Amara was no longer afraid. The tension in the office reached a boiling point. Amara had seen this moment coming, the inevitable escalation before everything snapped. Richard was like a cornered predator, sensing something amiss but unable to pinpoint the source of his unease. His arrogance made him reckless, his actions more audacious. Amara was prepared. Every incident, every word, every humiliation was now evidence. On a rainy Thursday morning, Amara walked into the office with her game face on. She wore a sharp navy suit that hugged her growing belly, her posture straight and unwavering. Her colleagues took notice. Something about her was different. Richard, too, saw the shift. He smirked at her from across the floor, as if daring her to challenge him. Amara ignored him and settled at her desk, her phone already discreetly recording. An email pinged her inbox. Subject: Performance Review, Discussion, Urgent. From Richard Trenton. The message was short. See me in my office at 11:30 a.m. We need to discuss your position at Titan Core Solutions. Amara's heart raced. She could almost hear his voice dripping with smug satisfaction, already deciding her fate. But she was ready. At precisely 11:30, Amara walked into Richard's office. The tension in the room was suffocating, the view of the rain-drenched skyline a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside. Richard sat behind his imposing desk, exuding smugness and power. "Close the door," he said without looking up. Amara did as he asked, her phone recording discreetly from her bag. "Sit down." She lowered herself into the chair, steadying her nerves. Richard finally looked up, his eyes cold and calculating. "Amara, I've given you chance after chance to prove yourself, and yet, here we are." "I don't understand," Amara replied evenly. "I've met all my deadlines and handled every project assigned to me." Richard leaned back, folding his hands over his chest. "Your performance has been subpar. You've been distracted. And quite frankly, your condition has made you unreliable." Amara's stomach turned, but she forced herself to remain calm. "My condition?" Richard smirked, his eyes flicking to her belly. "I'm talking about your pregnancy, Amara. It's affecting your work, and I won't allow it to impact this team any further." Amara's voice hardened. "My pregnancy has not affected my work. If you're accusing me of underperformance, I'd like specific examples." Richard's smirk faltered for a moment, but he recovered quickly. "Let's not waste time. I'm giving you two options. Either you resign voluntarily, or I'll have no choice but to terminate your position for failure to meet expectations." Amara's heart pounded, but her voice remained steady. "You want me to resign? Why? Because I'm pregnant? Because I refuse to let you intimidate me?" Richard's face darkened. "Watch your tone." "I won't," Amara shot back, fire in her eyes. "Because you're crossing a line, Richard. You're discriminating against me, and you know it." Richard stood abruptly, his voice rising for the first time. "Be careful, Amara. I've seen your type before. Always playing the victim, always looking for excuses." Amara rose to her feet, staring him down. "You'll regret this." Richard scoffed. "I'm not the one who should be worried." Amara turned on her heel and left the office, her hands shaking with adrenaline. Her phone had captured it all, every word, every threat. That evening, Amara sat with Elena in a small cafe not far from the office. Rain drummed softly against the windows, the warm glow of the cafe lights creating a false sense of calm. "I have it all," Amara said, sliding her phone across the table. "Everything he said today. Everything he's done." Elena listened to the recordings, her expression hardening with every word. "This is it. This is undeniable. With these recordings and the pattern you've documented, he won't stand a chance." Amara exhaled, a mix of relief and anxiety washing over her. "What happens now?" Elena leaned in, her voice low. "First, we take this to HR. Not the internal team Richard has in his pocket, but the regional office. They'll have no choice but to investigate. If that doesn't work, we go public." "Public?" Amara echoed, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. Elena nodded. "Social media, the press, men like Richard thrive in darkness. We expose him to the light, and his empire crumbles." Amara hesitated. "But what if I lose everything? My job, my career?" Elena placed a firm hand on hers. "Amara, if you let him get away with this, he'll do it to someone else. You have the power to stop him." Amara took a deep breath, the weight of her decision settling on her shoulders. "You're right. I can't let him win." The next morning, Amara written statements and supporting documents to Titan Core's regional HR office. Elena ensured it landed directly in the inbox of the firm's top compliance officer. For hours, Amara heard nothing. The office carried on as usual, the buzz of keyboards and phone calls masking the storm brewing beneath the surface. At noon, Richard emerged from his office, walking with his usual arrogance. But Amara noticed something different, the faint crease of worry in his brow, the stiffness in his movements. She sat at her desk, calm and focused, her eyes never leaving him. At 2 p.m., everything changed. Richard's phone buzzed, and his expression darkened as he read the message. He disappeared into his office, slamming the door behind him. Minutes later, senior executives began arriving on the floor, their voices hushed and faces tense. The office buzzed with whispers. "What's going on?" someone asked. "I heard HR's here. Something big must have happened." Amara remained silent, her heart thudding in her chest. She knew what was happening. The first domino had fallen, and Richard's carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack. At 4 p.m., Richard stormed out of his office, his face red with fury. He glared at Amara as he passed, his voice a low growl. "You think you've won? This isn't over." Amara didn't flinch. She met his gaze, unyielding. "We'll see." As Richard disappeared down the hallway, Elena appeared at her desk, a satisfied smile on her face. "The regional office has launched a formal investigation," Elena whispered. "They're pulling his emails, his records, everything. He's finished." Amara exhaled slowly, a wave of relief washing over her. But she knew this wasn't the end. The real fight was just beginning. That night, Amara sat at her kitchen table once again, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. The weight of what she'd done pressed on her chest, but for the first time, it didn't feel unbearable. Her phone buzzed with a message from Elena. "They're calling him in for a hearing tomorrow. Be ready." Amara placed a protective hand on her belly, whispering softly, "We're almost there. Just a little longer." She knew the battle wasn't over, but she had taken the first step toward justice, and no matter what happened next, she would not back down. The fall is coming, she thought again. This time, she knew it for certain. The morning of the formal hearing arrived. The atmosphere at Titan Core Solutions was electric with tension. Word had spread that Richard Trenton was under investigation, though no one knew the full details. Whispers floated through the hallways, hushed voices speculating on what could have brought the powerful executive under such scrutiny. Amara walked into the office with her chin held high, her belly slightly more prominent beneath her fitted dress. Colleagues glanced her way, some offering encouraging nods or whispered words of support. For the first time, she felt seen. Elena found her at her desk just after 9 a.m., her face grave but determined. "They've called for a closed hearing," Elena said softly. "The regional HR team is leading it. They want Richard, you, and anyone else who has witnessed his behavior to be present." Amara felt her pulse quicken. "Is that normal?" "Rare, but given the evidence you've provided, they're taking this seriously," Elena replied. "This is your moment, Amara. Don't let him intimidate you." Amara nodded, steadying her breath. "I won't." The hearing was held in the company's boardroom. Large glass walls lined the room, but the blinds were drawn, shielding the meeting from curious onlookers. Seated at the long mahogany table were the regional HR compliance officer, two senior executives from Titan Core's corporate headquarters, Elena and Richard himself. Richard sat at the far end of the table, his posture stiff and his face unreadable. He wore his usual crisp suit, but the confidence he exuded was now dimmed. Amara was called in last. She walked into the room with purpose, clutching her notebook and phone, where the recordings and notes were stored. Her nerves hummed, but she straightened her spine. This was her fight, and she would see it through. The compliance officer, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair named Mr. Hayes, started the proceedings. "We are here today to address allegations of workplace misconduct and discriminatory behavior. Ms. Adeyemi, please state your case and present your evidence." Amara cleared her throat. All eyes turned to her. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes." She looked directly at Richard as she began. "Over the past few months, I have been subjected to targeted harassment, public humiliation, and discriminatory treatment at the hands of Mr. Richard Trenton." His behavior escalated after I disclosed my pregnancy, leading to multiple incidents that I can document." Richard scoffed, shaking his head, but Mr. Hayes held up a hand to silence him. "Continue," Hayes said firmly. Amara opened her notebook and retrieved her phone. "I have recordings of multiple interactions where Mr. Trenton made inappropriate and discriminatory remarks. I also have notes and emails that illustrate a clear pattern of harassment." She pressed play on her phone, and Richard's voice filled the room. "People like you don't last here, Amara. You're replaceable." The room went silent. She played more recordings, Richard belittling her work, mocking her pregnancy, and threatening her position at the company. Each word hit like a punch, the arrogance and venom in his tone impossible to deny. Richard's face reddened as the room absorbed the evidence. He opened his mouth to protest, but Mr. Hayes stopped him with a look. "Mr. Trenton, do you deny these are your words?" Richard's voice wavered. "This is completely out of context. She's manipulating this." Amara kept her focus steady. "They're not out of context. I've been documenting everything because I knew this day would come. You wanted me to quit because of my pregnancy. You humiliated me knowing I had no power to fight back. But you underestimated me, Richard." The compliance officer spoke up. "Mr. Trenton, do you have any evidence to counter these claims?" Richard fumbled for words, his facade finally cracking. "This is ridiculous. I've been a loyal employee for years. Who are you going to believe? Some... Careful, Mr. Trenton," Mr. Hayes said sharply. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard slumped back in his chair, defeated. After the hearing, Amara returned to her desk to wait. The hours dragged on, but she remained calm. Word spread quickly that Richard had been summoned to a second private meeting with senior executives. By late afternoon, Elena found Amara and pulled her aside. "They've reached a decision," Elena whispered, her voice triumphant. "Richard has been suspended pending further investigation, effective immediately." Amara blinked in disbelief. "Suspended?" Elena nodded. "They're reviewing his entire history with the company. Emails, complaints, financials. It's only a matter of time before he's terminated. You did it, Amara." A wave of relief and vindication washed over her. After weeks of humiliation, stress, and fear, she had finally struck a blow against the man who thought he was untouchable. The office was abuzz with gossip the next morning. Richard's empty office was like a black hole, pulling in curious stares and hushed whispers. Some colleagues approached Amara to offer support, their expressions a mix of admiration and guilt. "I'm sorry we didn't say anything," one coworker admitted softly. "We saw what was happening, but we were afraid." Amara offered a forgiving smile. "I understand, but it stops now." Elena joined her for lunch that day, grinning over a sandwich. "You know, you might have started something bigger than you realize." "What do you mean?" Amara asked. "Other employees have come forward," Elena replied. "People who worked under Richard for years. Turns out you weren't the first he mistreated, just the first to fight back." Amara's heart swelled with pride. She had cracked the glass ceiling that protected men like Richard. That evening, Amara sat in her living room, sipping tea and listening to the soft hum of the city outside her window. Her phone buzzed with a message from her lawyer. "Richard's team has reached out to settle. They want this to go away quietly. Call me to discuss terms." Amara stared at the message, a satisfied smile forming on her lips. She had options now, real options. Richard was finally facing the consequences of his actions, and she had emerged stronger. She placed her hand on her belly, whispering softly, "We did it, little one." Her journey had been brutal, but she had survived. She had fought for herself, for her baby, and for every person who had ever been silenced by people like Richard. The next day, as Amara walked to work, she felt lighter than she had in months. Titan Core Solutions had been forced to acknowledge its own failings, and Richard's reign of intimidation was over. Elena met her at the office entrance, grinning as she handed Amara a steaming coffee. "Good news," Elena said. "HR's offering you a promotion, team lead." Amara blinked in shock. "What?" "They know they can't lose you. Elena explained. "You're the kind of leader this place needs." Amara smiled, gratitude and pride filling her chest. She had earned this. As she entered the office, colleagues greeted her with newfound respect. The woman they had once dismissed as weak was now a symbol of courage, a force to be reckoned with. Amara sat at her desk, ready for the next chapter. She had proven to herself, and to the world, that she was unstoppable. And this was only the beginning. The news of Richard's suspension rippled far beyond the walls of Titan Core Solutions. Within days, industry insiders began whispering about the Trenton scandal, a moniker now firmly attached to his name. Richard's reputation, once polished and untouchable, was tarnished. Major clients began pulling contracts from the firm, demanding clarity and accountability. The board had no choice but to accelerate their investigation. Amara, meanwhile, focused on the quiet work of rebuilding. Though the storm was not fully over, her life was finally beginning to stabilize. On Monday morning, Amara received an email from Titan Core's CEO, Margaret Holmes. It was formal but warm. "Dear Ms. Adeyemi, I would like to personally acknowledge your courage in bringing recent events to light. Employees like you are the heart of this company, and your integrity has not gone unnoticed. I would like to meet with you to discuss your future here at Titan Core Solutions. Please let me know a time that works best for you." Amara read the email 3 times, disbelief mixing with pride. A meeting with Margaret Holmes, the CEO, was unheard of for someone at her level. When Amara shared the news with Elena, her friend nearly dropped her coffee. "Do you realize what this means? Margaret Holmes doesn't meet with anyone unless they're being fast-tracked." "Fast-tracked for what?" Amara asked cautiously. "Leadership. Real leadership." Amara felt her pulse quicken. The thought of a real future here, of not just surviving but thriving, seemed almost impossible. On the day of her meeting with Margaret Holmes, Amara wore her favorite power suit, crisp, tailored, and unapologetically professional. Elena gave her a thumbs up as she left the office, whispering, "Show her who you are, Amara." The CEO's office was on the top floor, a sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Margaret Holmes was seated at a large desk, her presence commanding yet calm. "Ms. Adeyemi," Margaret said warmly as she gestured for Amara to sit. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Please, call me Margaret." "Thank you for this opportunity," Amara replied, keeping her voice steady. Margaret leaned forward, hands clasped. "I want to start by saying that what you did, standing up to Richard Trenton, took remarkable courage. We've uncovered patterns of misconduct that go back years, but no one was willing to step forward until you did." Amara swallowed, unsure of what to say. Margaret continued, "We can't undo the damage Richard caused, but we can learn from it. I've spoken to the board, and we agree that this company needs leaders who are ethical, resilient, and unafraid to hold others accountable. You embody those qualities, Amara." Amara's breath caught. "I'm honored to hear that." Margaret smiled. "We'd like to promote you to Project Team Lead, effective immediately. It's a significant step up, and I believe you're more than ready for it. This isn't charity. This is recognition of the work you've done and the leader you've proven to be." Tears pricked Amara's eyes, but she blinked them away. "Thank you. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Margaret said firmly. "This company is better because of people like you." Amara descended from the top floor in a daze. Elena was waiting for her near the elevators, a knowing smile on her face. "Well, tell me everything." "They promoted me," Amara said, almost in disbelief. "Project Team Lead." Elena let out a loud cheer, earning a few stares from passing employees. "I knew it. This is just the beginning, Amara. You're unstoppable." They celebrated that night at a small Italian restaurant downtown. Amara ordered sparkling water, placing a protective hand on her belly as Elena raised a toast. "To Amara Adeyemi," Elena declared. "The woman who took down a tyrant, stood up for herself, and is now paving the way for others. You inspire me." Amara smiled, warmth filling her chest. To all the people who believed in me. And to the little one, she added softly, glancing down at her growing bump. Meanwhile, Richard's world continued to unravel. Titan Core Solutions officially announced his termination 2 weeks after the hearing. The statement was clinical and cold. Titan Core Solutions has terminated Richard Trenton following a thorough investigation into workplace misconduct and violations of company policy. We remain committed to fostering a culture of integrity, accountability, and inclusivity. News outlets picked up the story, and soon Richard's name was splashed across headlines. Amara watched the news quietly from her couch, the headlines validating her struggle. Elena sent her links to articles, each one painting Richard as the villain he truly was. But what struck Amara most was the flood of messages she received. Emails, LinkedIn messages, and anonymous notes poured in from colleagues, former employees, and even strangers. Amara realized then that her fight hadn't just been for herself. It had been for everyone who'd ever been silenced. Months later, Amara sat in her newly decorated office, her title proudly displayed on the door. Project Team Lead, Titan Core Solutions. A framed picture of her family in Nigeria sat on her desk, alongside a small ultrasound photo of her unborn child. Elena popped her head in, grinning. "Ready for the team meeting, boss?" "Boss?" Amara teased. "Don't let it get to your head." Elena laughed. "I'm just proud of you. We all are." Amara smiled, rising from her chair and straightening her blazer. As she led her team into the conference room, she reflected on how far she had come, from the young girl leaving Nigeria with nothing but a scholarship, to a woman who had stood her ground and changed her life. Her baby kicked softly as if to remind her they were in this together. "Let's get to work," she said to her team, the confidence in her voice unwavering. Amara Adeyemi had not just survived, she had thrived, and she knew that this was only the beginning. The days following Amara's promotion were a blur of meetings, emails, and new responsibilities. While her position as project team lead was a milestone, she was not one to sit back and bask in the glory. Her resolve to change the toxic corporate culture at Titan Core Solutions grew stronger with every passing day. Amara was determined to make a difference not only for herself and her unborn child, but for the entire team she now led. She knew her new role came with challenges, but she was ready. Her first major initiative was to restructure her department. For too long, Titan Core had allowed toxic power dynamics to fester, and Amara had witnessed firsthand how it stifled creativity, collaboration, and morale. She couldn't let that happen again. At the start of the month, Amara called for a company-wide meeting. She'd requested time with the senior leadership team to present her vision for the future of the company, one that prioritized inclusivity, transparency, and accountability. Elena, her right-hand woman, helped her prepare. They spent days drafting a plan that addressed everything from team dynamics to employee well-being. Amara knew that making sweeping changes required more than just a set of policies. It required a cultural shift. The day of the meeting, she stood in front of the large conference table, her colleagues and executives seated before her. The room was full, but Amara's calm presence filled the space, and everyone seemed to hang on her every word. "Thank you for this opportunity," she began, her voice steady but firm. "We are in the midst of a defining moment for Titan Core Solutions. We've been shaken by recent events, but I believe this is our chance to reset our values and build a company where integrity and respect are not just buzzwords. They are fundamental to who we are." Amara laid out her vision for the future. Her presentation was well received, but it was the next part that left everyone speechless. Amara revealed a new initiative that she had secretly been working on with the HR department. She called it the Truth Project, a program designed to give employees a platform to share their stories of discrimination, bias, or mistreatment, while offering support, resources, and counseling. "I want everyone to feel that they are heard," she said, her voice growing softer but more resolute. "I want to know the truth of what's been happening in this company, and I want to change it." Her words hung in the air, leaving a mixture of awe and uncertainty among the room. But it was a pivotal moment. The truth, no matter how uncomfortable, had been laid bare. and Amara had claimed her role as the architect of change. Despite the support Amara had received, not everyone was on board with her vision. Some of the senior leaders, particularly those who had worked alongside Richard, felt threatened by her progress. They had grown accustomed to the old ways of operating, where power was concentrated in a few hands, and dissent was silenced. One afternoon, Amara received a cryptic email from an unknown sender. It read, "You've made a grave mistake, Amara. You're stirring up a hornet's nest that you won't be able to control. People are watching, and they'll turn on you when the time is right." Amara's heart skipped a beat. The message was unsettling, but she didn't let it distract her. If anything, it reinforced her resolve. Elena, ever the protector, was furious when Amara shared the email with her. "Who would do this? Who dares threaten you?" Amara smiled faintly. "It's not a threat if you're not afraid. They want me to back down, but I won't." She was right. The email wasn't a warning, it was a challenge. As weeks passed, Amara's initiatives began to take root. The Truth Project was met with a wave of support, and employees from all levels came forward with their stories. The program quickly became a safe space for employees to confront the uncomfortable realities of their workplace. And for Amara, it was proof that her vision was working. She spent hours meeting with staff members, listening to their concerns, and implementing changes. Slowly but surely, she started to dismantle the culture of silence that had plagued Titan Core Solutions. At the same time, Amara had to contend with the growing resistance from some senior executives, particularly those who had been complicit in the old ways. They began to rally against her, questioning her methods in meetings and trying to undermine her influence. But Amara had a new weapon: her support from the employees. One afternoon, as Amara walked into a board meeting, she could feel the tension in the air. Richard's loyalists, sensing their power slipping away, had banded together. "Amara," one of the senior leaders, Greg Langston, began, his tone sharp, "you're disrupting everything this company has worked for. These changes you're pushing, these initiatives, are undermining the foundation of Titan Core Solutions. We've been successful for years, and you're putting that all at risk." Amara felt the weight of his words but didn't flinch. "You're right, Greg. I'm disrupting the old ways because they weren't working. The truth is, your success has come at the cost of people's dignity and well-being. You've ignored the real problem, but I won't. I'm here to make things right." A murmur ran through the room. Amara had said it. She had confronted the powerful men in the room head-on. Greg shot back, "You're naive, Amara. You think you can change decades of entrenched behavior with a few nice speeches and policies. People don't work like that." Amara stood taller, her resolve clear. "I'm not changing decades of behavior with speeches. I'm changing it with action. And if you don't want to be part of that, I'll do it without you." The room fell silent. Greg's face reddened, but he said nothing more. Amara had won this round. As the days wore on, Amara began to see cracks in the opposition. Some of the senior leaders, who had been skeptical of her changes, began to come around. They saw the positive impact of her initiatives, the increased morale in the office, and the genuine desire from employees to be part of something better. And then there were the allies who had been waiting for someone like Amara to come along. One by one, they stepped forward, supporting her with their own ideas and insights. Together, they formed a powerful coalition that would help steer the company through its turbulent transformation. Amara realized something crucial in that moment. Change wasn't about fighting everyone. It was about finding the people who shared her vision and empowering them to lead alongside her. It wasn't long before Titan Core Solutions was forced to confront a larger issue. As the fallout from Richard's misconduct continued to reverberate through the company, external investigations began to dig deeper. The public was watching, and the pressure was mounting. Amara knew the road ahead would be rocky. There would be challenges and moments of doubt. But for the first time since she'd arrived at Titan Core, she was certain about one thing. She was exactly where she was meant to be. And no one could stop her now. As the months progressed, Titan Core Solutions faced a continued storm of external and internal pressure. The public, especially the media, followed every step of the investigation into Richard's misconduct. There were whispers about what other companies might do, if similar behaviors were uncovered. Titan Core was in the spotlight, and for all the wrong reasons. Yet, amid this chaos, Amara had found her voice and was now leading the company toward an uncertain but promising future. Amara had expected the transition to leadership to be difficult, but she hadn't anticipated the long and intense battle that would come with it. While the board publicly supported her, behind closed doors, there was still significant resistance from those who had grown comfortable in the status quo. Some of the most influential people at Titan Core had been too closely aligned with Richard, and they were unwilling to let go of the power he'd once wielded. But Amara's growing influence was undeniable. Slowly, as the months wore on, more senior executives began to fall into line with her vision. It wasn't that they were all convinced by her moral stand. Some simply realized that the company had no choice but to change if it wanted to survive. The Truth Project, which Amara had created as a platform for employees to share their experiences, became a landmark program. It exposed a dark history of harassment, favoritism, and negligence, but it also allowed the company to heal. Employees felt seen and heard for the first time in years, and morale steadily improved. However, the backlash from certain quarters didn't stop. Richard's loyalists were vocal, and they tried to exploit every loophole in the system, hoping that Amara's momentum would fade. They underestimated her. Then came the breakthrough Amara had been waiting for. A major client, one of Titan Core's largest, publicly declared their support for Amara's leadership. The announcement was made during a joint press conference, and the CEO of the client company openly praised Amara's commitment to transparency and corporate responsibility. "This is the kind of leadership we need in today's world," the client CEO said, looking directly into the cameras. "Amara Adeyemi is someone who embodies integrity and accountability, and that's why we've chosen to stay with Titan Core. We believe in her vision for the future." The press conference was a turning point for Amara and Titan Core. The public narrative shifted from scandal to redemption. The media, once fixated on the company's failures, now began to focus on the bold steps Amara was taking to rebuild the company from the ground up. Her email inbox was flooded with messages of support. Her colleagues were proud, and her network expanded as other companies reached out to her, eager to see how Titan Core was turning things around under her leadership. But there was still one battle left to fight: the final reckoning with Richard Trenton. He had been quiet for weeks, hiding away from the public eye after his dismissal. However, as the company regained stability, he re-emerged, determined to take back what he believed was rightfully his. Richard filed a lawsuit against Titan Core, claiming wrongful termination and defamation. He hired a high-powered law firm and began to make waves in the press, claiming that Amara's actions were politically motivated and unjust. The media once again began to swarm around Titan Core, reigniting old debates and controversies. Amara, however, refused to be intimidated. She knew that Richard's lawsuit was nothing more than an attempt to regain power, but this time, he wouldn't succeed. The legal battle dragged on for months, but Amara's position remained strong. The evidence was clear, the public was on her side, and the truth was on her side. The company's commitment to change was undeniable, and her leadership had proven effective in cleaning up the mess Richard had left behind. Finally, after a long and drawn-out court battle, the judge ruled in favor of Titan Core. Richard's claims of wrongful termination were dismissed, and the defamation lawsuit was thrown out of court. The legal fees were steep, but the victory was sweet. It was a victory not just for Amara, but for every employee who had suffered under Richard's reign. The legal decision was a final confirmation that the company had made the right choice in moving forward with a new, ethical leadership. Amara sat in her office the day the verdict came down, a moment of quiet reflection as she thought about how far she had come. She was now the face of Titan Core, and the journey from the moment she first walked through the doors to this moment of triumph had been nothing short of extraordinary. Her baby kicked gently, a reminder of the future she was fighting for, not just for herself, but for every employee who worked at Titan Core. The company was no longer just a place where people worked. It was a place where they could thrive, be heard, and grow. Elena stood in the doorway of her office, a wide grin on her face. It's official. Richard's gone for good, and you're the one who made it happen. Amara smiled, but her eyes remained steady. We did it, Elena. This company isn't just about surviving anymore. It's about thriving. It's about standing up for what's right and making sure no one ever has to feel the way we did under Richard. Elena nodded. And you're the one who made it happen. You're the reason we have a future here. Amara glanced out of her office window. The city sprawled before her. She had fought for this. She had risked everything for it. And now, she stood at the helm of a company on the path to true transformation. The company was finally free from the shadow of its past. The light of hope, integrity, and justice was now firmly cast across Titan Core Solutions. Months later, Amara found herself in a different kind of meeting. This one wasn't about policies or changes to the organizational structure. It was about something more personal. The company had invited her to speak at an annual industry conference, an event that attracted leaders from across the business world. As Amara took the stage, pregnant with her child, she felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known. Thank you for having me, she began, her voice strong, yet warm. Today I stand before you not just as a leader, but as a mother-to-be. As a woman who has fought for every step, every inch of progress in my life and my career. And as a woman who believes in the power of truth, the importance of standing up for what is right, and the incredible strength that lies within us when we refuse to back down. Her words were met with a standing ovation, and in that moment, Amara knew that the fight had been worth it. She had not only transformed Titan Core Solutions, but she had created a legacy of justice, a legacy of strength, and most importantly, a legacy of change that would continue long after she was gone. The future was hers to shape. Kindness grows when we share it, and I'm so thankful you're here. For another story that warms the heart, click the video to the left. And if you believe in the power of these moments, subscribe to join me in spreading light even further. See you next time.